Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know we love to unpack a good mystery, and the case we're looking at today is full of twists and turns.
It's a real head scratcher for sure.
It is. So get ready, because this one's going to be a wild ride.
All right.
Let's dive in. We're taking a trip back to 1993 to Pennsylvania, where a first-grade teacher named Joanne Chambers found herself at the center of a very strange harassment campaign.
Yeah, what's so interesting right off the bat with this one is that it all starts very quietly.
Hmm.
Unsigned letters start showing up at the school where Joanne worked, at the Kabor Learning Center.
So just like your typical anonymous notes?
Well, not exactly. See, these weren't just your run-of-the-mill schoolyard gossip. These letters were pretty vicious, actually.
Oh.
They accused Joanne of some pretty serious stuff.
Hmm.
Drinking, bringing cannabis to school, even being a bad teacher.
Wow. But didn't I read that Joanne was actually super well liked by both her colleagues and her students?
Exactly. That's what makes this case so fascinating. You have these letters painting this really negative picture of Joanne, but it's totally at odds with how everyone who knew her actually saw her. Colleagues described her as this fun, creative teacher, someone who even got into water balloon fights with the administrators. Like, that's not something you do if you're
Yeah.
not well liked.
No, definitely not. So it makes you wonder, why go through all that trouble to make up all these stories about her? What was the point?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What were they hoping to achieve? It really gets you thinking about how easily perceptions can be manipulated. And the thing is, the harassment didn't stop with just the letters.
Really? What happened?
Well, it started escalating. They began appearing in her mailbox, then right on her desk,
Oh, no.
along with other, let's say, disturbing gifts, like an empty whiskey bottle planted right there in her desk.
Okay, it's one thing to spread rumors, but to actually plant evidence like that is pretty messed up.
Right. I mean, it's a whole different level of disturbing, and it just kept escalating from there. Eventually, she even found feces smeared on her chair.
Ugh, that's just awful. It's hard to even imagine how violating and scary that must have been.
Absolutely. And it's like, where do you even go from there?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear this is way beyond some harmless prank at this point.
Right, exactly. And the thing is, it didn't even stop at school. It started spilling over into Joanne's personal life, too. She started getting hang-up calls at home, and then the letters, those menacing letters, they followed her home, too.
Oh, wow, so she couldn't even escape it at home.
Nope. And some of these letters even threatened poisoning. One ended with the chilling message, "You die."
Wow, now this is getting really serious. Like, this is way beyond a prank. These are serious threats. Did the police get involved at this point?
Yes, they definitely did. And their investigation quickly focused on people within the school. A fellow teacher, Paula Noraki, became their prime suspect. I mean, you can imagine in a situation like this, investigators are going to look for people who might have a reason to target the victim.
Right, yeah. So was there something that pointed to Paula specifically? Like, what made her a suspect?
Well, for one, there were pretty different personalities. Joanne was described as outgoing and creative, the kind of teacher who wasn't afraid to get a little silly,
Yeah.
while Paula was seen as more traditional and reserved. And there were rumors going around the staff that Paula might be jealous of Joanne's popularity with the students.
Ah, okay, the classic rivalry trope. But do we know if there was actually any truth to that?
Hard to say for sure, but there were a couple incidents that kind of fueled suspicions. One was caught on a hidden camera in Joanne's classroom where Paula takes Joanne's coffee cup.
Oh, wow. And given those threats about poisoning, I can see how that would raise a few eyebrows.
Exactly. And then there was this comment that Paula made. She compared the school superintendent to a character from Hogan's Heroes. And wouldn't you know it, a similar remark had appeared in one of those anonymous letters.
Oh, interesting. So you've got these personality clashes, a potentially incriminating moment on camera, and then this comment that seems to link Paula to the letters. That's starting to feel like a pretty strong case against her.
You would think, right. And that's where the investigation seemed to be heading. Paula agreed to take a polygraph test, thinking it would clear her name. But the results, they indicated deception when she denied involvement.
Oh, no.
And in a moment of frustration, she even told the police, "You'll never prove it was me."
That's a pretty bold statement from someone who claims to be innocent. The police take that as an admission of guilt?
They definitely took it as more evidence to support their suspicions. They searched Paula's home, they seized her typewriter and stationery. They seemed pretty convinced they had their culprit. But this is where the case takes a hard left turn. Because Paula, she makes a really crucial decision. She pushes for DNA testing on those letters.
Huh. That's a pretty confident move for someone who's already a prime suspect.
Hmm.
I'm guessing the results of that DNA test are where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah, you could say that. The results of that DNA test were a bombshell.
I bet. What do they find?
The DNA on the stamps, it matched Joanne Chambers.
Wait, what? The victim's DNA was on the evidence? How is that even possible?
It was a huge twist, no doubt about it. Totally threw a wrench in the investigation. Joanne's explanation was that she had accidentally knocked some stamps off of one of the letters at the police station
Okay.
and tried to stick them back on using her saliva. But even the chemist who was analyzing the evidence, even he was skeptical about that.
I can imagine. Was there any other DNA evidence?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a sample taken from the adhesive on the envelopes. And it wasn't a strong enough sample to get a full DNA profile.
Okay.
But it was enough to exclude Paula.
So her DNA wasn't on the envelopes?
No. But get this, they couldn't exclude Joanne.
Oh, wow. So now you've got circumstantial evidence pointing to Paula. You've got this statement she made that seems pretty incriminating, but then you have DNA evidence that links Joanne to the letters. I mean, what do you even do with that?
Right. The case was suddenly a whole lot more complicated.
Yeah, definitely not as clear-cut as it seemed at first. So what happened next? Did they drop the charges against Paula?
Well, no, not exactly. Even with this new DNA evidence, the case against Paula, it still moved forward. She was formally charged and faced a potential sentence of years in prison if found guilty. And not just that, she could also face tens of thousands of dollars in fines.
Wow, that's intense. So what was the atmosphere like at the trial?
It was tense. I mean, the stakes were incredibly high for everyone involved. And both sides, they were completely determined to present their case. Paula, though, she maintained her innocence throughout the entire trial.
Did she offer any explanation as to why she thought Joanne might be behind all of this?
Well, she stated she believed that Joanne was actually the one behind the whole harassment campaign, perhaps even trying to frame her. Or maybe to gain attention.
Gain attention.
You know, that's a possible motive we see in these types of cases sometimes. And remember that incident with the coffee cup that was caught on camera?
Yeah.
Well, Paula had an explanation for that too. She said she only took Joanne's coffee cup that day because Joanne had actually asked her to.
Oh, so there's an explanation for that. Interesting. Was there anything else that came to light during the trial that might support her claim?
There actually was. It turned out that the polygraph test that Paula took was much more rigorous than the one that Joanne took.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it kind of raised questions about the validity of those initial results. And remember that statement Paula made to the police, that "you'll never prove it was me" comment.
Yeah, the one that seemed so incriminating.
Right. Well, it turns out that that statement, that was actually taken out of context. Like it was part of a much longer conversation where she was basically just expressing frustration at being falsely accused.
So the prosecution's case is starting to fall apart a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. And don't forget about those searches of Paula's home. Remember, they seized her typewriter and her stationery, thinking they'd find a match to the letters? Well, it turned out that none of the stuff they took from her home matched the threatening letters at all.
Wow. What about Joanne's typewriter? Was that ever examined?
Nope, never. And there's more. Remember how Joanne claimed she used a glue stick to reattach those stamps? Well, a chemist testified that if that were true, the adhesive should have turned blue under a UV light, but it didn't.
It seems like all of this initial evidence that seemed to point to Paula is falling apart under closer examination.
Yeah.
So, did Joanne end up testifying at the trial?
She did, but her testimony did not help her case. Court reporters described her as endy, inconsistent, and even sarcastic at times.
Not a good look.
No, not at all. And then, just when you think things couldn't get any wilder, a bombshell drops. Remember how Joanne had mentioned a previous thought where she claimed to have found feces on her chair?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the principal from that school, he actually testified at the trial about the incident.
Okay.
And guess what? It turned out that Joanne had reported similar harassment back then, too. Claimed she had received threatening calls and that someone was going to burn down her house.
Hold on a second. So this wasn't the first time she'd been the target of harassment?
Exactly. And Paula's private investigator, he had been busy.
Oh.
Yeah, he'd uncovered even more information. He'd found witnesses who had worked with Joanne at that former school, and their accounts, well, they painted a pretty troubling picture.
Oh, no. Really? What did they say?
They described Joanne as someone who, well, she fabricated stories, stirred up trouble, even tried to get other teachers in trouble.
Wow, so now there's this pattern emerging.
All right, and it's starting to look like Joanne might have a history of creating drama and maybe even making false accusations.
That's a pretty serious claim.
It is, and it's the argument that the defense ultimately presented. They argued that Joanne had basically orchestrated this entire elaborate scheme to frame Paula.
What would be her motive?
Well, maybe something as simple as Paula not giving her special treatment, like some of the other teachers supposedly did. And remember, there were no witnesses to that car chase incident on the interstate. It was Joanne's word against Paula's.
This whole thing is crazy. So, what did the jury decide? I mean, with all this conflicting evidence and Joanne's past behavior coming to light, it couldn't have been an easy decision.
Yeah, the jury definitely had their work cut out for them with this one.
So what did they decide?
Well, after a pretty long and complicated trial, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours.
Wow, less than 2 hours.
Yeah, and they came back with a verdict of not guilty on all charges.
Oh, wow. I bet Paula felt a huge wave of relief after all of that.
Oh, for sure. It was a huge victory for her. But, and this is kind of crazy, her ordeal, it wasn't actually over yet.
What do you mean? I thought she was cleared of all the charges.
She was, legally, yes, but she still had to face a school board hearing.
A school board hearing?
Yeah, to determine whether or not she could keep her job.
Oh, wow. Seriously. So even though she was acquitted in court, she could still lose her job.
Yep. They were looking into charges of immorality and a whole bunch of other violations that stemmed from those initial allegations.
I mean, that seems a little unfair, don't you think? I mean, she was cleared in court. Why does she have to go through another hearing?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough situation, but that's how it goes sometimes.
So what happened at the hearing?
Well, it was pretty much a rehashing of all the evidence and the arguments that were presented at the trial.
Oh, I bet that was super stressful for Paula.
I'm sure it was. But in the end, the good news is she was actually cleared of all those charges too, and she was allowed to keep her job.
Oh, thank goodness. So after all of that, at least she got to keep her job.
Yeah, she did. And there's more.
Oh,
Paula actually ended up receiving a pretty substantial settlement.
really? How much are we talking?
$600,000 from the school district
Whoa.
and another $25,000 from Joanne Chambers herself.
Wow. So not only did she get to keep her job, but she also received quite a bit of financial compensation for what she went through.
She did. It was like an acknowledgement of the damage that all those accusations had done to her reputation and her career. And get this, she even sued the lead detective on the case for defamation.
Oh, why?
Well, she claimed that he had basically pursued the case against her without probable cause. Probable cause is that legal standard for initiating an arrest or a search.
Right. So even though she was legally cleared, she wanted to hold him accountable for the way he handled the investigation. What happened with that lawsuit?
The detective, he refused to settle out of court, and the case actually went to trial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in the end, he was acquitted of defamation. But still, it really goes to show the impact that this whole thing had on Paula.
It's a good reminder that even if accusations are proven false, they can still have lasting consequences. It makes you wonder about Joanne, like what were her motives? And did she even understand how serious her actions were?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And what's even more perplexing is that even after the trial, after all the investigation, after all the evidence, they never actually figured out who was behind those acts of harassment.
Wait, really?
Nope. The case remains unsolved.
So we're left with a mystery. If it wasn't Paula, then who was it? And why go to all that trouble to target Joanne?
That's the big question, isn't it? I guess some mysteries are just destined to remain unsolved. Like the detective's lawyer put it, someone was very clever and very careful, covered their tracks well.
Wow. This whole case has been a real roller coaster ride. We started with these anonymous letters, what seemed like a pretty straightforward harassment case.
Right.
Then we get this DNA evidence that throws everything we thought we knew out the window. And then at the trial, we find out about Joanne's past, and it really makes you question everything she said. And in the end, even though Paul is cleared, we still don't know who the real culprit is.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how easily we can be misled, how complex human behavior is, and how sometimes it can be really hard to separate truth from fiction.
Yeah, no kidding. This deep dive has definitely made me question how I perceive information and how I form judgments.
That's the beauty of exploring cases like this. They challenge us to think critically and to question everything.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, folks. The utterly baffling case of Joanne Chambers and Paula Noraki. A story of accusations, betrayal, and a mystery that continues to this day.
It's a case that'll stick with you. A reminder that the truth can be elusive, and that even when we think we have all the answers, there's always more to the story.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning and keep exploring.